Imagine you knew exactly when your income was going to stop forever. Not slow down, not shrink, stop completely. And you had maybe 20 to 30 years to figure out how to survive without it. What would you do with the time you had left? That is not a hypothetical question for Saudi Arabia. That is their actual reality right now. And the way they are choosing to spend their final oil era is either the most brilliant financial strategy in modern history or the most expensive gamble any country has ever made. Nobody knows which one yet. To understand what Saudi Arabia is doing right now, we need to understand what Saudi Arabia actually is. Because most people think of it as simply an oil country, and that is true, but the scale of how true that is will shock you. Saudi Arabia sits on top of roughly 17% of the entire world's proven oil reserves. That is not 17% of the Middle East, that is 17% of everything that exists under the ground on the entire planet Earth. For context, the United States, the largest economy in the world, sits on about 4%. Oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia in 1938. Before that, Saudi Arabia was one of the poorest and most remote places on the planet, mostly desert, a small population of nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes, almost no infrastructure, almost no institutions, almost no economy in any modern sense of the word. Within a single generation, oil transformed it into something almost unrecognizable. Roads appeared, cities rose from the sand, hospitals, universities, airports, and palaces materialized at a speed that had no historical precedent anywhere on Earth. By the 1970s, Saudi Arabia was so wealthy from oil that it did not need to tax its citizens at all. The government simply paid for everything directly from oil revenues. Free healthcare, free education, heavily subsidized housing, electricity, and fuel. Government jobs with generous salaries for enormous portions of the population. The social contract in Saudi Arabia became something unique in the world. The government provides, the people do not question. Oil made that deal possible, and for decades, it worked. Oil prices rose, revenues flowed, the kingdom expanded. But here is the thing about building an entire civilization on top of a single finite resource. Eventually, you have to reckon with the word finite. The reckoning started becoming impossible to ignore in the 2010s. Two things happened at almost exactly the same time, and together they changed everything. First, the shale oil revolution in the United States suddenly made America energy independent and flooded the global market with new supply. Oil prices that had been sitting comfortably above $100 a barrel crashed to below $30 at one point. Saudi Arabia's budget, which had been built on the assumption of high oil prices, suddenly had a hole in it the size of a small country. Second, and more importantly in the long run, the global conversation about climate change began shifting from something environmentalists talked about to something that governments, corporations, and financial institutions started treating as an actual economic reality. Electric vehicles stopped being a curiosity and started becoming a genuine industry. Solar and wind energy costs collapsed to the point where they began competing directly with fossil fuels on price. The writing was not exactly on the wall. It was on every wall in every language simultaneously. Saudi Arabia looked at these two developments and did something that surprised a lot of people. Instead of denying the problem or hoping it would reverse, the kingdom commissioned one of the most ambitious national transformation plans any country has ever attempted. It was called Vision 2030, and it was built around one brutally honest admission: we cannot be an oil country forever. We need to become something else before the oil runs out, or before the world stops wanting it, whichever comes first. Vision 2030 was announced in 2016 by a then 30-year-old prince named Mohammed bin Salman, who most people now know simply as MBS. The plan had an ambition that was almost difficult to take seriously when it was first announced. Saudi Arabia would build an entirely new economy from scratch alongside the existing oil economy. Tourism, technology, entertainment, manufacturing, finance, sports, all of it would be developed simultaneously at a scale and speed that no country had ever attempted before. The money to fund all of this would come from one source, the Public Investment Fund, which is Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund. essentially a giant government-controlled investment account. And the plan was to take oil revenues and pump them into the public investment fund until it became so large that its investment returns alone could fund the Saudi government even after the last barrel of oil was pumped. The target was to grow the fund to $2 trillion. For reference, that would make it the largest sovereign wealth fund in the history of the world. What happened next was where things got genuinely extraordinary. Saudi Arabia did not just make cautious, sensible investments. It went on what can only be described as the most aggressive and eclectic spending spree any government has ever undertaken. The public investment fund bought nearly 5% of Tesla when Elon Musk was struggling to keep the company alive. It poured billions into SoftBank's Vision Fund, which then sprayed money across hundreds of technology startups globally. It took enormous stakes in companies across gaming, entertainment, technology, and logistics simultaneously. Then came the sports strategy. Saudi Arabia paid Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the most famous athletes on the planet, a reported $200 million per year to play football in a league that almost nobody outside the kingdom had ever watched. Then came Lionel Messi discussions, LIV Golf, which broke apart the professional golf world, Formula One races, boxing matches, and a bid for the 2034 FIFA World Cup that was approved. The sports spending alone ran into tens of billions of dollars, and the world oscillated between mockery and genuine concern about what it actually meant. And then came NEOM. This is perhaps the single most audacious project in the entire Vision 2030 plan. NEOM is a planned city in the northwest desert of Saudi Arabia. Not a normal city, a completely new kind of city. The centerpiece is something called the Line, a linear city 170 kilometers long, 500 meters tall, and only 200 meters wide. No cars, no roads, no carbon emissions. Everything powered by renewable energy, housing 9 million people in a structure that has never existed anywhere on Earth before. The projected cost is $500 billion. Whether it will ever be fully built is a question economists and architects argue about constantly. Underneath all of this spectacle is a genuine and urgent economic problem that has not yet been solved. Saudi Arabia has created enormous infrastructure and entertainment and investment activity, but it has not yet successfully created the thing it needs most, which is a large private sector economy that employs Saudi citizens in productive, skilled work without government support. The youth unemployment rate among Saudi nationals remains high. Economic diversification at the scale Vision 2030 requires takes generations, not years. And the clock that started ticking in 1938 when the first oil came out of the ground has never stopped. So what is Saudi Arabia actually doing? It is doing something that no country has ever had the money or the urgency to attempt at exactly this scale. It is trying to buy its way out of a resource dependency trap before the trap closes permanently. Some of what it is spending on is genuinely visionary: renewable energy infrastructure, technology investment, tourism development in one of the most historically rich regions on Earth. Some of what it is spending on looks more like distraction, sporting events and celebrity signings that generate attention but not necessarily the deep economic transformation the country actually needs. The honest answer is that nobody knows yet whether Vision 2030 will work. The deadline is real, the money is real, the ambition is real. But ambition and money have never automatically produced economic transformation on their own. History is full of resource-rich countries that saw the end coming and still could not pivot in time. The question for Saudi Arabia is not whether they're trying. They're clearly trying harder than almost any country in history has tried at anything. The question is whether trying hard enough and spending enough money is sufficient when the thing you're trying to build has never been built before on this timeline. Every dollar of oil that comes out of the ground right now is simultaneously funding the present and trying to purchase a future. That tension is what makes Saudi Arabia the most fascinating economic story on the planet right now. Not because we know how it ends, but because we are watching it happen in real time, and the ending is genuinely uncertain. If you want to keep watching economies that are making decisions today that will define the next 50 years, this is exactly the channel for that. Subscribe and come back for the next one because we are just getting started.